What would you do if someone told you to turn your entire army around in 72 hours in the dead of winter and march directly into one of the bloodiest battles of World War II? Most generals would call it impossible, but George S. Patton Jr. wasn't like most generals. By December 1944, the war in Europe looked nearly won. Allied forces had pushed deep into France, and many believed Germany was finished. But then came a shocking surprise. Hitler launched one final desperate gamble in the frozen forests of Belgium, a move that threatened to split the Allied armies and change the course of the war. The Germans laughed, convinced they had caught the Americans off guard. What they didn't expect was that within days, Patton would lead his men into the snow and turn the battlefield red. And it all began in the Ardennes. On December 16, 1944, the quiet forests of the Ardennes erupted in fire and steel. In the early morning darkness, German artillery opened up, shattering the silence and raining shells on thinly held American positions. What followed was the largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940, an attack Hitler believed could change everything. The plan was audacious. Hitler wanted to drive 60 miles through Belgium, capture the port of Antwerp, and split the British and American armies in two. If successful, he hoped it would force the Allies to negotiate peace, allowing Germany to focus entirely on the Soviets in the East. To achieve this, the Germans assembled nearly 250,000 men and 1,000 tanks, including elite panzer divisions. They relied on total secrecy, moving troops only at night and maintaining strict radio silence. Allied intelligence failed to detect the buildup. When the attack came, it achieved complete surprise. The results were immediate and devastating. American lines crumbled under the sudden onslaught. Entire divisions were scattered. Soldiers retreated in confusion, many abandoning their equipment. German armored columns pushed westward, capturing villages and crossroads, driving a bulge into the Allied front line that would give the battle its famous name, the Battle of the Bulge. One town became the focus of German attention, Bastogne. A vital crossroads, it was held by the 101st Airborne Division and elements of other units. Surrounded and cut off, these troops faced overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, chaos spread through Allied headquarters. Reports were grim. The Germans had advanced 20 miles in just 2 days. The once confident Allied command now stared at the possibility of disaster.
The contrast could not have been starker. German commanders were jubilant, convinced that victory was finally within reach. American soldiers, caught in the freezing woods, struggled simply to survive. Panic spread. If the German advance continued unchecked, Antwerp could fall, and with it, the Allied coalition might fracture. But not everyone was panicking. While most commanders scrambled to understand what was happening, one general was already thinking several moves ahead. George Patton saw not just a crisis, but an opportunity. Hitler's last gamble unleashed chaos, stunning the Allies and putting Bastogne in peril. But as panic spread, Patton began preparing his response. While others searched for answers, Patton was already ready with one. At a tense meeting in Verdun on December 19th, Allied commanders gathered to assess the crisis. Eisenhower, grim-faced, demanded solutions. The Germans had achieved total surprise and were pushing rapidly toward Antwerp. Could anyone stop them? The room fell silent, until one man stood up. George S. Patton Jr., commander of the U.S. Third Army, calmly told Eisenhower that he could pivot his forces and launch a counterattack within 48 hours. At first, the room erupted in disbelief. Most thought he was lying or insane. Turning an entire army in the middle of winter while still engaged in combat seemed impossible. But Patton wasn't bluffing. Unknown to the others, Patton had already anticipated the possibility of a German offensive. His intelligence staff had noted unusual German movements, and he had ordered 3 contingency plans prepared. So when Eisenhower asked how soon he could move, Patton was ready with an answer no one else could give. The scale of what he proposed was staggering. 6 full divisions of the Third Army would disengage from their current battles, pivot 90 degrees, and march north more than 100 miles to relieve Bastogne. They would do this through snow and ice on treacherous roads with temperatures plunging to -7 degrees Celsius. Most military experts would have dismissed it as madness, but for Patton, it was an opportunity to strike back with boldness and speed. Logistics became the key. Engineers worked around the clock to keep roads open. Supply officers scrambled to reroute fuel, ammunition, and rations. Soldiers trudged forward in bitter cold, often with frost clinging to their faces and snow soaking through their boots. For many, the march felt endless, but the sense of urgency was undeniable. They knew Bastogne was surrounded, and their comrades needed them. The contrast here was stark. Other Allied commanders hesitated, struggling to react to the crisis. Patton, by contrast, seized the initiative, transforming what seemed impossible into reality. His leadership style, direct, aggressive, unrelenting, now proved invaluable. By December 22nd, his Third Army was on the move, tanks grinding through ice and infantry marching mile after mile. It was one of the most remarkable maneuvers of the war, and soon, those men would meet the Germans in the snow. Patton's foresight and audacity allowed him to turn the Third Army like a weapon, moving with speed and precision no one thought possible. But the march was just a beginning. The real test came at Bastogne, where Patton's men would meet the enemy head-on.
By late December, the fate of Bastogne and the entire Western Front hung in the balance. Surrounded by German forces, the 101st Airborne was running low on food, medicine, and ammunition. When the Germans demanded surrender, General McAuliffe gave his famous reply, "Nuts." The defenders held out, but without relief their situation was desperate. That relief came from the south. Patton's Third Army thundered forward, smashing into the German flank. What followed was brutal combat in snow-choked forests and frozen fields. Tanks bogged down in icy mud, soldiers fought frostbite as well as bullets, and medics struggled to save the wounded in makeshift aid stations. The winter was merciless, but so were the Americans. German confidence began to collapse. Their offensive had relied on speed and captured fuel. Instead, they found themselves stalled, short on supplies, and facing an enemy who refused to break. Each day, Patton's men pushed further, bleeding the German advance dry. The fight for Bastogne became the symbol of American resilience. Cooks, clerks, and engineers took up rifles. Convoys fought through blizzards to bring supplies. Airborne drops delivered food and ammunition. Slowly, the encirclement was broken. By Christmas, Patton's tanks had reached the defenders, lifting the siege and turning the tide of battle. The contrast could not have been clearer. The Germans had gambled everything on this offensive, hoping to split the Allies and force peace. Instead, they were stopped cold, literally. Their losses in men and tanks were catastrophic. Hitler's last gamble on the Western Front ended in failure. For the soldiers who fought there, the memory would never fade. The snow of the Ardennes turned red with blood, a testament to the cost of freedom and the endurance of those who refused to surrender. Patton's counterattack shattered the German offensive, broke the siege of Bastogne, and transformed Hitler's last hope into defeat. The cost was high, but the legacy was undeniable.